I take honor and privilege to invite my colleague, who is the standing committee member, a minister of Nicaragua, Paul, to share his experience. Please, Paul.
Congratulations to the Standing Committee of Finance, of which I have the honor to be a member, for another forum on a very important subject. There are 5 takeaways to this presentation. The first is the position that it is urgent that we begin to base our policies and practices on science and not on political compromises at the lowest common denominator of CO2e emissions reductions. The second takeaway is that in 2017, science indicates that we have only 3 years until 2020 to begin the rapid reduction of CO2e if we want to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. 2020 is the year of no return, and beyond that, it will be impossible to reverse the process of climate deterioration. The third takeaway is that to achieve this 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade of temperature increase in this century, it is necessary that gross emissions decline by half every decade, from 40 metric gigatons of carbon dioxide per year in 2020 to 24 by 2030, 14 by 2040, and 5 by 2050. How to finance this gigantic task, and all of the speakers here have mentioned the huge sums required for resilient infrastructure. Well, one possible source of immediate mobilization of funds to begin this process before 2020 are available. They consist of the $6.75 trillion in cash held by large corporations listed on the world's major stock markets. The fifth takeaway is that this capital could be mobilized by the sale of AAA green bonds issued by multilateral development banks and placed in existing financial mechanisms so as not to create anything new and move fast, such as the GCF, the GEF, the Cooperative Fund for Forest Partnership, the Adaptation Fund, and the climate windows of the very same multilateral banks that would issue the bonds. The Paris Agreement would seek to take us to 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, but the 2015 INDCs will take us to 2.7 to 3.5 degrees, according to the same documents of the Paris Agreement. This is a worldwide average which would take us to 4 to 6 degrees in the tropics, deserts, and Arctic regions. So this is what that would imply between now and 2099. We need to get the ball rolling with zero carbon buildings, electric drive vehicles, modern solar and wind technologies, and to make these technologies mainstream. Significant climate action must be taken now. The coming decade will be too late. And in this process also, in the balance, are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. Because if we do not meet our climate limitation goals, they will not come to pass. The science I'm discussing is contained in the March 2017 Science Journal, in which there's an article, A Roadmap for Rapid Decarbonization, which proposes the halving of global emissions for each decade. This is by the director of the Stockholm Sustainability Institute, by the director of the Potsdam Climate Investigation Institute, and other distinguished scientists. So they present a roadmap for rapid decarbonization that would allow us, if followed, to have a 66% probability of limiting warming below 2 degrees in 2100, and a 50% probability of limiting warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade, the ultimate goal of Paris, by 2100. In the Nature journal, in June of this year, there was a comment on the Science article by the same distinguished scientist, also Christiana Figueres, the ex-director of the UNFCCC, signed this, as well as 68 other scientists and environmentalists, pointing out that we have 3 years to safeguard our climate, that 2020 is the limit. We know that now we've experienced Harvey this year, Irma, which is the second strongest storm ever found in the Atlantic, is currently over the leewards and headed towards Puerto Rico, Cuba, and points north. Nicaragua shares the hope that this 2017-2020 window of opportunity is taken advantage of through the mobilization of funds now for climate mitigation, adaptation, including resilient infrastructure, loss and damages. Nicaragua notes with concern that the public funds of developed countries have serious limitations. The U.S. has announced its withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. There is significant opposition to climate action in the U.S. Congress. The U.S. is reducing its contributions to United Nations climate change institutions by about 20%, and the GCF capitalization by $2 billion. However, there's some very promising and encouraging notes. There are 10 states of the United States that have publicly committed to continuing to pursue their emission reduction goals, and several others, 4 more, or 6 more rather, that might soon join this alliance. Furthermore, there are 369 cities representing a population of 67.5 million in the United States that have committed to adopt, honor, and uphold the climate goals of the Paris Agreement. Now, here we have the largest cities of the United States pledging to do the reduction. The opinion in the United States also supports these actions in every state, in figures that range from 50% to 75%. So this is very encouraging, as is the fact that large transnational corporations and U.S. private sector corporations have publicly announced, putting announcements in the media, as these that I'm showing here, of their commitment to following through on emissions reductions. Now, this alternative source of financing I mentioned, on the 31st of December 2016, the S&P 500 companies had $2.5 trillion in cash. The FTSE CAC, DAX, and other exchanges in Europe had $1.1 trillion in cash of the stocks listed on these. The Nikkei stocks in Japan, $2.4 trillion in cash, and the Kospi stocks in Korea, $0.75 trillion. That's $6.75 trillion. That's up from $5.3 trillion last year. So this is increasing. These are the firms. They're firms that have made large profits from all of us in recent years and have this enormous liquidity. They're mostly the high-tech stocks and also some of the chemical stocks, the pharmaceuticals. These are the Japanese firms, these are the Korean firms, and these are the European firms with the largest stocks of cash. The global economy is not being stimulated by these funds sitting there as idle cash. Both World Bank President Jim Jong Kim and IMF General Director Madame Lagarde have stated that central banks have done more or less all they can to stimulate the economy, and that other sectors and stakeholders should step up. These idle corporate funds are a potential stimulus that would also reduce inequality, inasmuch as that much funds in so few hands is contributing to the 1% of concentration of income and wealth. And this can not only stimulate the world economy and reduce inequality a little bit, but also invest in stopping climate change and achieving the SDGs. The solution would be the AAA funds, and for these firms to be lobbied to buy these AAA funds at no sacrifice whatsoever to themselves. Instead of idle funds, they would have income-producing investments, and so that these funds could be rapidly used, they should be placed with the Green Climate Fund, GEF, the Climate Investment Funds, the Adaptation Fund, the Forest Carbon Partnership, and the climate change windows of the very same multilateral institutions. And negotiations can take place. We've presented this to all of the general directors of the OECD, who say they're in agreement with all three of these key points. You already have declarations by Tim Cook, of the CEO of Apple, and the CEO of Microsoft, of being interested in contributing to reducing climate change. Now, the investments must be in clearly projects and infrastructure with a clear climate change content, like renewable energies, sustainable transportation, energy efficiency, reforestation, especially of degraded lands, potable water, etc. In Nicaragua, a small developing country, we are investing in infrastructure to deal with climate change, new roads and bridges, especially to our previously isolated Caribbean coast that could only be reached by river, air, or sea, now is being connected to the rest of the country, expansion of drainage systems, medical facilities, and early warning systems for natural disasters like tsunamis. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.